Imagine stepping out of your front door right now.
Right.
The sun is beating down, the air is thick, it's stagnant, and you are entirely convinced that the very atmosphere you are breathing is literally trying to murder you.
And not in some, vague, long-term environmental way either.
No, we are talking actively, swiftly, and just brutally. You're in London. The year is 1854.
A terrible time to be there, honestly.
Oh, absolutely. The summer heat is oppressive, and this terrifying, invisible killer is stalking the cobblestone streets, basically wiping out entire households in a matter of hours.
Yeah, it's a complete nightmare scenario.
It really is. So I want you, the listener, to put yourself in this specific headspace right now. Have you ever known deep down in your bones that you were absolutely right about something vital, like something literally life or death?
But the catch is, the entire world is against you.
Exactly. The entire world, including the most decorated, highly educated experts of the day, they look you right in the eye and tell you that your reality is just a delusion.
It is a uniquely terrifying form of isolation, isn't it?
I can't even imagine.
To be the sole custodian of a truth that could save thousands of lives, while the establishment actively works against you.
And the crazy part is, they aren't working against you out of some cartoonish malice, right?
No, not at all. They are working against you out of a profound, misguided certainty in their own flawed paradigms. They genuinely believe they are saving the city.
While actually, allowing it to die.
Right.
That profound isolation, that incredible friction between a lone truth teller and a panicked society is exactly what we're digging into today.
And it is such a fascinating topic.
It's amazing. We are exploring what has to be one of the most brilliant literary and historical intersections I have ever come across in a deep dive.
For sure. It's a perfect mashup.
So on one side of the ledger, we have the hard, grim historical reality laid out in Stephen Johnson's acclaimed nonfiction book, The Ghost Map.
Which is just a fantastic book on its own.
Oh, incredible. Johnson meticulously details the true events of the 1854 Broad Street cholera epidemic.
Right.
But on the other side, we are holding that history up against Gabriel Stroup's speculative short story, which is also called The Ghost Map.
Yes, the opening tale in his broader collection, The Necessary Fictions of Sherlock Holmes.
Right. Stroup takes this devastating real-world crisis and literally drops Arthur Conan Doyle's most famous creation, Sherlock Holmes, right onto the historical cobblestones of Soho.
Right alongside the actual historical people who lived through it.
Which serves as a remarkably potent narrative engine, right? Because placing a fictional detective into a meticulously researched historical tragedy, it's not merely a parlor trick.
No, not at all. Stroup is using Holmes as a mechanism, to explore how societies process truth during a crisis.
Yeah, it forces us to ask some really fundamental questions about institutional inertia, like how is certainty constructed by those in power?
And what is the human cost? The cost of translating complex, terrifying data into a narrative that a frightened public can actually comprehend.
Exactly. The stakes of this narrative stretch way, way beyond a simple whodunit.
Right. We are examining the very evolution of scientific rationalism here and, how fragile that rationalism is when it's confronted by human fear.
Okay, so to even begin to understand why Gabriel Stroup felt compelled to insert Sherlock Holmes into this specific Victorian nightmare, we have to, fully immerse ourselves in the nightmare itself.
We really do. You have to understand the ground level reality.
Right. We need to look at London in the mid-19th century and the invisible horror that was lurking in a single neighborhood water pump.
So if we look at Stephen Johnson's historical context, London in 1854 was a city basically buckling under its own weight.
Industrialization had triggered this unprecedented population boom, right?
Exactly. People were flooding in from the countryside, just packing into these incredibly dense, crumbling tenements.
And tearing through this hyper-dense urban landscape was cholera.
Yeah. And we often hear the word cholera tossed around in historical dramas, but
it's always like someone coughing delicately into a handkerchief.
Right. But Johnson makes it very clear this was not a poetic, gentle fading away in a pristine bed.
Well,
the reality was visually and physically shocking. The pathology of cholera is something that fundamentally violated the Victorian sense of bodily autonomy, and their sense of decorum.
Because when a person contracted the disease, the onset was not a slow decline over weeks, was it?
No, it was catastrophic and abrupt. The defining characteristic is massive, violent dehydration.
Okay, break that down for us because the mechanics of it are wild.
Yeah, so the bacteria Vibrio cholerae, it secretes a toxin in the small intestine. And this toxin essentially hijacks the cellular machinery.
Like it takes over the cells.
Exactly. It forces the cells lining the gut to endlessly pump out chloride ions. And biologically speaking, water simply follows the salt.
Oh, wow. So the body just...
The body's fluids literally flood into the digestive tract and are expelled. The medical literature of the time obsessively documented the production of what they called rice water stools.
Ugh. Which was what exactly?
It was the opaque liquid fluid draining from the patient. It looked like the water you get after boiling rice.
Wow. Okay, so the body is essentially flushing itself inside out.
That is exactly what is happening, yeah.
The sheer volume of water lost must have caused immediate systemic collapse. I mean, you can't survive that.
Right. A patient could lose up to 10 to 20 liters of fluid a single day.
20 liters? That's insane.
Because the water is being pulled directly from the bloodstream, right? So the blood itself thickens into this tar-like consistency.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and the heart struggles to pump this sludge. As a result, the capillaries in the extremities are starved of oxygen.
Which causes the physical changes they saw, right?
Yes, it causes the patient's skin to turn a distinct, terrifying shade of blue.
That is horrifying.
It gets worse. The severe dehydration causes the skin to lose all elasticity, and the facial features actually sink in. It gave the living the appearance of a skull.
So they look like walking corpses before they were even dead.
Basically. Plus, muscle cramps of unimaginable agony would seize the limbs as electrolytes just vanished from their system.
And the speed of this mechanism was the true terror, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. A person could be walking to work in the morning, feel a slight rumble in their stomach by noon, and be dead by midnight.
Dead in 12 hours.
Yeah, 12 hours.
You know, the psychological toll of that kind of speed is hard to fathom. When an invisible killer can strike that quickly, it strips away the illusion of safety entirely.
You look at your neighbor, they look fine, and tomorrow they are a corpse.
Right. And faced with that level of random, sudden death, the human brain desperately seeks an explanation.
Of course.
It has to. The medical and scientific establishment of 1854 had to provide an answer to a terrified public.
And the answer they provided, which was the unquestioned dogma of the era, was miasma theory.
Miasma theory. Okay, so what exactly was this? Because it wasn't just some fringe belief, was it?
No, not at all. Miasma theory was the absolute bedrock of global medical understanding. It was a lineage of thought stretching back 2 millennia, all the way to Galen and Hippocrates.
Wow. So it was deeply entrenched.
Deeply. The core postulate was that disease was not passed from person to person, but rather spread by bad air.
Bad air, meaning like smells.
Yes, a poisonous atmosphere emanating from rotting organic matter, stagnant water, decaying refuse. Fun fact, the word malaria itself literally translates from Italian as bad air. The belief was deeply sensory. If you smelled something foul, you were not merely smelling a byproduct of decay, you were inhaling the disease itself.
The atmosphere was the vector.
Exactly.
Okay, if we put ourselves in their shoes, walking through the streets of 1854 London, miasma theory wasn't just a blind guess, though.
No, it made deeply intuitive sense based on their daily reality.
Because London, before the modern sewer system, was a complete sensory nightmare. I mean, you had slaughterhouses dumping offal right in the city center.
Right.
You had hundreds of thousands of horses leaving tons of manure on the streets daily. You had overflowing cesspools in the basements of crowded tenements.
And the Thames River.
Oh, right, the Thames. The main artery of the city was effectively an open, sluggish sewer that stank to high heaven.
Yeah, so if you step outside and the air smells like death, and everywhere it smells like death, people are dying.
The leap to the smell as causing the death is entirely logical for the tools they had.
It really was. It was an incredibly elegant theory that perfectly fit their observational data. I mean, our brains are biologically hardwired by evolution to be repulsed by the smell of putrefaction.
Right. To avoid eating rotten food or pathogens.
Exactly. The Victorians simply elevated that biological instinct into a complete epidemiological framework.
But the theory's power went far beyond just sensory intuition, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. This is where it gets really dark. Miasma theory perfectly aligned with the moral and social cosmology of the Victorian era.
Right.
It allowed the establishment to seamlessly connect physical disease with moral failing.
Because who lives in the areas that smell the worst?
The poorest classes.
And in the Victorian mindset, poverty was often viewed as a moral defect.
Right. The poorest neighborhoods were the most crowded, they had the worst sanitation, and therefore they smelled the most offensive.
And consequently, they suffered the highest mortality rates.
So the establishment looked at this and concluded that disease follows vice.
foul smells equaled foul outcomes.
Exactly. Which were supposedly the natural consequence of bad habits, laziness, and moral corruption.
Man. So to challenge the miasma theory was not merely proposing a different medical mechanism.
No, it was challenging the entire social order.
It was threatening a worldview that allowed the wealthy to distance themselves morally and physically from the suffering of the poor.
Exactly. It was political.
So, into this massive fortress of entrenched belief steps Dr. John Snow.
Yes, the real historical hero.
Right. The history tells us that Snow looks at the spread of cholera and firmly rejects the air as the culprit.
He argues that cholera is waterborne, entering through the digestive tract.
And he eventually teams up with Reverend Henry Whitehead, right? A local vicar who knows the Soho community intimately, and together they start to track the disease.
Yeah, but looking at Stephen Johnson's analysis, the fascinating question here is, why Snow?
Right. Out of all the brilliant medical minds in London, why was this specific, somewhat introverted doctor uniquely equipped to see through a 2,000-year-old paradigm?
Well, the answer lies in his specific, highly technical day job, which Johnson details heavily, and Stroup actually leverages in his fiction.
Okay, so what was his day job?
John Snow was primarily an anesthesiologist.
Wait, like putting people under for surgery? In the 1850s?
Yeah. In fact, he was a foundational pioneer in the field. He was the physician who calculated the precise dosages of ether and chloroform to safely sedate patients.
That's incredible.
He even administered chloroform to Queen Victoria during the birth of Prince Leopold.
Oh, wow. Okay, so he's well connected. He's at the top of his field.
Right. And to be a pioneer in anesthetics in the 1850s meant you spent your life studying the physics of invisible gases.
So he understood exactly how vapors behaved in a three-dimensional space.
Exactly. He knew how gases diffused, how they were affected by temperature, by density, and by air currents.
That makes perfect sense.
So when Snow looked at the cholera outbreak radiating from Broad Street, he applied the rigid physics of his profession.
Right, because if cholera was a miasma, a toxic cloud of gas rising from the Thames or an open sewer, it would obey the laws of physics.
Right. It would disperse outward, diluting as it expanded, pushed by the wind, affecting the population in a broad, relatively even gradient.
But the death toll on the ground wasn't doing that, was it?
No, it was shockingly hyper-localized. It would devastate one specific boarding house, killing 10 people, while the house immediately next door, breathing the exact same air, remained completely untouched.
Wow. So the behavior of the disease was actively contradicting the physics of a gas.
Completely.
I love the modern analogy for this. It's like trying to put out a localized house fire by spraying air freshener into the sky. They were obsessing over the ambient smell of the city and completely ignoring the highly specific mechanism of transmission.
And furthermore, Snow looked at the clinical pathology of the victims.
The symptoms.
Right. If a poison is inhaled, the primary site of trauma should be the respiratory system. You would expect coughing, pulmonary distress, or asphyxiation.
But cholera victims had perfectly clear lungs.
Right. The entirety of the disease was centralized in the gastrointestinal tract.
So from a purely mechanical standpoint, Snow reasoned that the pathogen must be ingested, not inhaled.
Right. The logic seems so crystalline in hindsight, but you have to remember, he is still fighting a monumental battle.
Because bacteriology does not exist yet.
Exactly. Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch are years away from proving germ theory.
So Snow is standing before the greatest scientific minds of his generation and asking them to believe in microscopic, invisible killers swimming in the water without a microscope powerful enough to show them the actual bacteria.
He has to prove his theory entirely through geographical mapping and what we call shoe leather epidemiology.
Right. He has the raw data, but he lacks the narrative authority to overcome institutional blindness.
And this historical bottleneck, this tension between having the truth and getting people to believe it, is the exact friction point where Gabriel Stroup inserts Sherlock Holmes.
Which is just such a genius move. The transition from the factual historical record into Stroup's literary convergence feels organic because Snow's real-life methodology was fundamentally an act of detection.
He was tracking an invisible killer through urban geography. Stroup simply recognizes the inherent mystery structure of the real event.
And Stroup's framing device for the necessary sections of Sherlock Holmes is incredibly clever, too. We aren't just handed a pastiche, are we?
No, not at all. We enter the story through meta-narrative.
Right. It is the year 2025. And we follow a character named Ellen Mackenzie, who's a PhD student at Cambridge University,
And she is digging through the dusty university archives.
where she uncovers a misfiled, yellowing manuscript titled The Devil in the Microscope, as related by Dr. John H. Watson.
And as a modern reader, Ellen provides the analytical lens through which we experience the Victorian story.
Yeah, and Ellen's immediate observation upon finding the manuscript really sets the tone for the entire collection.
She notices that the margins of the manuscript, which are written in Arthur Conan Doyle's own precise handwriting, are heavily annotated with historically verified footnotes.
So the fiction is anchored in rigorous reality.
Exactly. The margins reference specific 19th century medical treatises, municipal cholera reports from the General Board of Health, and even laboratory methodologies that predate the widespread acceptance of germ theory.
So Stroup establishes a universe where Doyle is grounding his fictional detective in hard, verifiable data.
Right. And Ellen makes a fascinating observation in her notes that struck me as the thesis statement for this entire deep dive.
Yes. She writes, literature historically borrowed from the authority of science. Science, in turn, is often haunted by narrative structure.
That is such a dense, heavy thought.
It really is. What does she mean when she says science is haunted by narrative?
Well, she is pointing out the symbiotic vulnerability between raw data and human communication.
Okay, unpack that a little.
Science generates facts, right. But facts in isolation are politically and socially inert.
They don't do anything on their own.
Exactly. To effect change, to make data legible to a frightened public or a stubborn bureaucracy, science requires a narrative. It needs a story that gives the data meaning and urgency.
Oh, I see.
Conversely, literature especially, the rigid procedural detective genre that Doyle popularized, borrows the aesthetics of the scientific method.
Right. The magnifying glass, the observation, the deduction.
Yes. These are scientific tools utilized to give fiction an aura of indisputable objective authority.
So in the story, when Dr. John Snow walks up the stairs of 221B Baker Street, he isn't coming as a typical client who has lost a family jewel or is being blackmailed.
No, he is a man waging a war against the establishment.
He brings Holmes a vial of clear water, declaring it his proof.
Right.
And he brings a real historical document, Thomas Shapter's History of the Cholera in Exeter, to demonstrate to Holmes that there is a documented precedent for tracing an outbreak to a single environmental source.
He is bringing the raw data to the great detective, basically seeking the narrative authority that his data alone cannot muster.
But I found myself questioning this choice while reading.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, by bringing Sherlock Holmes, this larger-than-life superhero of logic, into the middle of Jon Snow's real, agonizing historical struggle, aren't we doing Snow a bit of a disservice?
I can see that.
We are taking a real-world genius who did the grueling, thankless work and potentially overshadowing him with a fictional character. Does Holmes steal Snow's thunder in the text?
It is a totally valid concern, but I think Stroup anticipates this and navigates the dynamic brilliantly.
Okay, how does he handle it?
Holmes does not deduce the origin of the cholera. Snow has already done that.
Oh, that's a crucial distinction.
Exactly. Snow arrives at Baker Street with the map already partially drawn in his mind. He has the hypothesis. What Snow lacks is the cultural capital to force the Board of Health to listen.
Right.
In the Victorian consciousness, Holmes represents the ultimate incorruptible avatar of rationalism.
Right.
By pairing them together, Stroup doesn't diminish Snow. He elevates Snow's real-life epidemiological mapping to the status of high-stakes detective work.
So Holmes is acting almost as a cultural validator, like a Victorian peer reviewer with a massive megaphone.
Precisely. In fact, Holmes remarks to Watson early in the investigation, "We are not studying the dead, Watson, but rather the patterns of the living."
I love that line.
Snow needed an impartial, highly respected witness to verify his methods. Holmes becomes the vehicle through which the modern reader experiences the sheer, radical danger of Snow's hypothesis.
Wow, okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So to validate this radical idea, Holmes and Watson have to descend into the hot zone.
They do.
They hit the streets of Soho.
And the clues they encounter on the street are where Stephen Johnson's history and Stroup's fiction perfectly synchronize.
They go hunting for the anomalies.
Yes.
They transition into the incredibly grim, squalid reality of the Soho streets to gather the street-level data.
And this requires us to really understand the infrastructure of 1850s London, which plays a massive, deeply tragic role in this outbreak.
The plumbing, basically.
Stephen Johnson outlines this heavily in the Ghost Map, and Stroup weaves it into the narrative as the central mechanical flaw of the city.
Let's dig into these specific anomalies, starting with the Huggins Brewery.
This is such a fascinating historical detail.
It really is. So Holmes and Watson walk into this massive industrial brewery right in the middle of the infected Soho zone.
The hot zone.
Yeah. The streets outside are literally lined with the dead and dying. It's awful. But inside the brewery, it's just business as usual.
The men are working hard, completely untouched by the cholera.
Holmes goes up to the foreman and asks how many cases of the disease they've had among the men.
And the foreman says none. Zero.
Zero. When Holmes asks about their water source, the foreman explains that the men don't actually drink from the local Broad Street pump.
Why would they? They work at a brewery.
Exactly. They are given a daily allowance of malt liquor, which they prefer anyway. And the water used in the brewery itself is drawn from a private, exceptionally deep well right on the premises.
Plus, the brewing process itself involves boiling the water,
which kills the cholera bacteria.
The workers didn't know why the beer was safe. They just knew they weren't getting sick if they stuck to the beer.
Talk about a good excuse to drink on the job.
Right. And then you have the St. James Workhouse.
Yes. Now, you would logically assume a workhouse, which is essentially a crowded, destitute prison for the poor.
Full of people the Victorians considered morally and physically susceptible.
Right. You'd think it would be an absolute bloodbath in there.
A total nightmare.
But it escapes the plague entirely. Why? Because, again, they were not connected to the municipal pump on Broad Street. They had their own private well.
Stroup also highlights the micro-level anomalies, the individual household cases that Stephen Johnson researched so thoroughly.
Like the widow.
Yeah, they visit a widow living in a narrow house just off Poland Street, deep in the miasma zone.
She's surrounded by the stench of the sewers.
Absolutely terrified of breathing the bad air. But she is perfectly healthy.
Not a symptom.
Right.
Because before the flush toilet, Londoners used cesspools.
Which sound awful.
They were. They were essentially giant brick pits dug underneath the basements of houses.
Gross.
Yeah. They were periodically emptied by night soil men. These were a specific class of laborers who hauled the human waste away in the middle of the night to be sold to farmers outside the city as fertilizer.
So it was a foul, terrible system, but
it was largely contained.
Right. The waste stayed in the pit until someone shoveled it out.
Yes. But then the flush toilet becomes the must-have middle-class convenience. Everybody wants one.
The newest gadget.
Yeah. So people install them haphazardly, and the sudden, massive influx of water required to flush these toilets.
Gallons and gallons of it.
Completely overwhelmed the existing brick cesspools. They filled up in days instead of months.
Oh, wow.
The liquid waste had nowhere to go, so it washed straight into the old surface water drains, saturated the soil, and seeped directly into the city's shallow drinking wells.
London adopted a modern convenience without updating the underlying infrastructure to handle it.
They basically transformed the ground beneath their feet into a toxic sponge.
The irony is just devastating. The pursuit of modern cleanliness actually accelerated the plague.
It caused the plague. But the most heartbreaking anomaly, which is a true historical fact that Stroup includes to devastating effect in the fiction, is the case of the sister from Leeds.
Oh, this one is so tragic.
It is. This is perhaps the most crucial and tragic piece of evidence Snow gathered.
Tell them about it.
So, Holmes and Watson find an elderly woman in Soho who is perfectly healthy, but her sister, who had recently visited her from the town of Leeds.
Which is miles away from London.
Right, miles away, completely free of the so-called London miasma. Her sister is dying of cholera.
So how could a woman living in clean air travel to London for a few days and catch a disease that the locals right around her weren't catching?
The answer is just sickeningly simple. The sister from Leeds preferred the taste of the Broad Street water.
Just the taste.
Just the taste. She thought it tasted cleaner, colder, and purer than her local water back home, or even the piped water in her sister's house.
So she specifically requested a jug of it be brought to her every single day?
Yes. She died entirely because of a preference for the taste of a poisoned well.
And this brings us to a really unsettling realization about human biology and our perception of the world.
It messes with your head.
It does, because the water from the Broad Street pump was highly sought after by the residents of Soho.
They loved it.
Because it looked crystal clear and tasted incredibly cold and fresh. The perceived purity was a complete, deadly illusion.
But how does that happen? I mean, if it's literally full of human waste, shouldn't it taste horrible?
You'd think so.
Shouldn't our evolutionary instincts kick in to warn us, like, don't drink this?
That is the terrifying reality of microscopic pathogens.
They hide so well.
Right. Our senses evolved to protect us from macro-level threats. We are naturally repelled by the smell of rotting meat or the cloudy green look of stagnant swamp water.
We see that and go, nope.
Exactly. But cholera bacteria are microscopic, they are invisible, and they are odorless. The Broad Street water was drawn from a shallow well. The water was clear because it was naturally filtered through a few feet of sand and soil, which removed the visible particulates of the waste.
Ah, so the solid stuff gets filtered out.
Yes, but the soil didn't filter out the microscopic bacteria leaking from the nearby cesspool.
Oh, man.
In fact, this is the craziest part. The slight carbonation from the decaying organic matter in the soil might have actually made the water taste crisper.
Crisper.
Yeah, or more refreshing to the Victorian palate.
That is a chilling concept.
Yeah.
Your own senses, your eyes telling you the water is clear, your taste buds telling you it's refreshing, will literally lie to you, right up to the point of killing you.
That is Stephen Johnson's core thesis in the Ghost Map, and the central theme Stroup is playing with.
You cannot trust your gut.
Literally. You cannot rely on intuition, tradition, or basic sensory observation to understand complex threats.
You need systemic data.
You need geographic science. You have to map the outcomes because human perception is fundamentally flawed.
And Stroup highlights a fascinating detail here regarding how snow historically proved the origin of the water when victims couldn't confirm where their water was drawn from.
Yes, the chemistry detail.
It involves a chemical test that feels incredibly modern. In the story, Snow uses silver nitrate to test the water samples pulled from the homes of the afflicted.
It's almost like a Victorian CSI paternity test for tap water.
Exactly. I love it.
The inclusion of the silver nitrate test grounds the narrative in the cutting-edge chemistry of the era. You see, the water supply infrastructure of South London in the 1850s was chaotic.
It was handled by competing private companies with overlapping jurisdictions, right?
Right. The two primary suppliers were the Lambeth Waterworks and the Southwark and Vauxhall Waterworks.
And their intake pipes were the key difference.
Exactly. Recognizing the increasing pollution of the Thames, the Lambeth Company had recently spent a fortune moving their water intake pipe far upriver.
Above the tidal flow where the raw sewage of London was dumped.
Right, so their water was relatively clean. The Southwark and Vauxhall Company, however, had refused to spend the money.
Typical.
They continued drawing their water from the heavily polluted tidal section of the river, essentially pump and diluted sewage directly into people's homes.
And because the two companies competed street by street, Snow had a natural randomized control trial.
But to prove his theory, he needed to know which company supplied which house.
Which is hard when the residents themselves often didn't know who they paid.
Right, so Snow relied on chemistry. He knew that the polluted tidal water of the Southwark Company had a significantly higher salt content from the estuary.
Okay.
By dropping a solution of silver nitrate into a water sample, a visible chemical reaction occurs. The silver reacts with the chlorides in the salt to form silver chloride, which precipitates as a thick, white, cloudy substance.
Ah. So if the water sample turned heavily cloudy, Snow knew it was the deadly Southwark water.
And if it remained relatively clear, it was the safer Lambeth water. Holmes observes this chemical sorting in the story, recognizing it as undeniable material proof tracing the path of the infection.
Wow. Okay, so the pattern is undeniably mapped. Holmes, Watson, and Snow have the chemical proof, the geographical mapping, and the documented exceptions.
The logic is impenetrable.
But as they transition from the streets of Soho to the halls of power, they discover that having the facts on your side is entirely different from forcing an entrenched authority to change its worldview.
Right, and this clash of ideologies is the philosophical core of the deep dive.
The story shifts from a street-level procedural into an institutional battle.
Holmes is forced to confront the titans of the Victorian establishment who hold the power to act.
And the first titan he encounters is at Middlesex Hospital, Florence Nightingale.
The inclusion of Nightingale is a masterstroke by Stroup.
Because she is not a villain.
No, she is a towering figure of competence and historical reverence. But in 1854, she represents the absolute pinnacle of the miasma theory.
Right. Stroup paints this vivid picture of her running a pristine, rigorously disciplined ward. Windows are thrown open for ventilation. Everything is scrubbed with chloride of lime.
And when Holmes questions her methods, she responds with unwavering conviction. Bad air begets bad habits. Disease appears to follow vice as smoke follows flame.
She is articulating the philosophy of moral hygiene.
Exactly. She genuinely believes that cleaning the air cleans the soul and that the physical sickness in the slums is a direct manifestation of moral decay.
But I want to step in and defend Nightingale slightly here.
Go ahead.
We revere Florence Nightingale, and rightly so. It's easy for us to sit here with our modern germ theory and judge her, but wasn't she just trying to bring order to chaos using the best mental models she had?
Oh, I agree completely. And the tragedy of the history and the brilliance of Stroop's story is that these are good people trying to do the right thing.
Right. Her response highlights the profound conflict between different epistemologies.
Nightingale was a brilliant administrator and a keen observer within the confines of her paradigm. Her insistence on cleanliness, ventilation, and changing bed linens drastically reduced mortality rates in hospitals by combating hospital-acquired infections.
So her methods worked brilliantly, but they worked for reasons she didn't fully understand.
Exactly. She was accidentally fighting bacteria while believing she was fighting odors.
Which makes her blindness to the waterborne nature of cholera all the more tragic.
It does.
Holmes has this incredible cutting retort to her philosophy. He says, nature's laws do not change according to our flimsy metaphors.
And later, walking away from the hospital, he turns to Watson and summarizes the tragedy perfectly. She cleans the air when the water kills, the city is rotting from below, and its angels are busy washing the ceiling. Washing the ceiling. Man, that is a devastating critique of institutional action that focuses on aesthetics rather than root causes.
And this institutional blindness is compounded when Snow and Holmes present the map to the General Board of Health.
Right. They face Sir Benjamin Hall and William Farr. Now, it is important to understand that William Farr was not a fool.
He wasn't just some stubborn politician.
No, he was the preeminent medical statistician of the British Empire. He was the man who actually collected and organized the very mortality data that Snow was using.
He knew the numbers.
He did, but Farr looks at the exact same data through the rigid lens of miasma theory.
Confirmation bias.
Exactly.
But it isn't just the medical institutions that are resisting Snow's data. It's the public on the street, too.
Oh, the mob.
Yes, there is this visceral mob fear taking over Soho. People are terrified of Snow.
Yeah.
In the story, they actually accuse him of poisoning the air with his death fumes.
So the public in Soho, who are terrified, dying, and desperately grasping for a narrative that makes sense of the chaos.
They look at this quiet doctor who works with invisible, sleep-inducing chemical gases.
And they construct a conspiracy theory.
Naturally.
They think he is creating the miasma. They believe he is poisoning them from the inside out with his unnatural experiments.
This is incredibly frustrating to read. I mean, Florence Nightingale is a genius of administration. Why is she ignoring the data? The public is desperate for a cure. Why attack the only man trying to find one?
It makes you want to pull your hair out.
Why is it so incredibly hard for smart people to accept new facts? Why go to such lengths to tie a biological illness to moral corruption?
It fundamentally comes down to psychological comfort.
Comfort.
And the preservation of the existing social hierarchy.
Oh, okay, the class system.
Exactly. If you accept miasma theory, as Florence Nightingale and the Victorian elite did, then disease makes sense in a socially comforting, predictable way.
It's poor people's disease.
Right. It means the disease targets the poor because they live in cramped squalor, because they have bad habits, or because they are morally lacking in hygiene.
It's their own fault.
Exactly. It creates a psychological and physical barrier. It tells the wealthy, aristocratic family living in a well-ventilated, spacious mansion in Mayfair.
So we're safe?
You are safe because you are clean, because you are moral, and because you are separated from the foul air of the slums.
It's a massive societal defense mechanism.
Totally.
If the poor are dying because they are immoral, then the rich are living because they are righteous. It perfectly justifies the inequality.
Exactly. But if Dr. John Snow is right,
Oh, boy.
if disease is carried by a microscopic organism in the municipal water supply, completely indifferent to your social standing, your wealth, your title, or your moral purity,
That is a terrifying, radically democratizing truth.
it means the wealthy industrialist could drink from the wrong crystal goblet at a fancy dinner party and die just as quickly and just as agonizingly as the poorest laborer in the Soho slums.
The germ doesn't care about your bank account.
Not at all. The establishment desperately wanted to reject Snow's theory because accepting it meant accepting their own profound, inescapable vulnerability.
They preferred the illusion of control that miasma theory provided over the chaotic, egalitarian reality of a waterborne pathogen.
It's the terror of equality and death. Miasma theory told them they were in control. Germ theory told them they were prey.
So to break this immense institutional and psychological deadlock, maps and anomalies aren't going to be enough.
You need more than paper.
Holmes and Snow realize they need undeniable, physical, visceral proof that cannot be argued away with moral philosophy. And this takes us into the literal unearthing of the killer. We are introduced to Reverend Henry Whitehead. He was the young vicar of St. Luke's Church in Soho, located right in the absolute epicenter of the Broad Street outbreak.
Historically, and in Stroup's text, Whitehead was initially a firm, unshakable believer in miasma theory.
He was all in on it.
He thought the plague was an atmospheric judgment, a mysterious act of God. He was so confident in the purity of the Broad Street water that he actually drank from the pump himself. He mixed it with a little brandy right at the height of the outbreak to prove his faith to his terrified parishioners.
Which, knowing what we know now, is literally playing Russian roulette with a glass of water.
Absolutely. But he survives.
If he drank the exact same water that was killing everyone else, how does he walk away?
It highlights the terrifying lottery of epidemiology.
But his personal survival initially bolstered his belief that the water was completely safe.
Of course it did. He thought God saved him. However, unlike the distant bureaucrats on the Board of Health, Whitehead is on the ground.
He's with the people.
He is deeply involved with the dying. He knows their daily habits, their routines, their moral character.
Right.
When Snow presents his geographic data, Whitehead realizes that his own parishioners, pious, clean, moral people, are dying just as fast as the local drunks.
So the morality argument falls apart for him.
It completely crumbles. He pivots. He allows his faith to be challenged by the empirical evidence.
Which takes a lot of guts.
It does. He decides that true faith requires seeking the truth to save his flock, rather than blindly clinging to a dogma that is getting them killed.
That is a profound intellectual and spiritual pivot.
Mm-hmm.
So because he's on board, we get this incredibly intense, macabre scene in the vestry of St. Luke's Church.
Oh, this scene is so dark.
Whitehead is treating the sick and the dying right on the floorboards of the church. It is chaotic, it is hot, the smell of death is overwhelming.
And Holmes and Watson enter the scene of absolute despair.
And Holmes, being Holmes, doesn't look at the sky or pray for deliverance.
He looks directly at the floor.
He notices the warped, discolored, slightly damp wood of the vestry floorboards. He takes his walking stick and pries up one of the heavy oak planks. And beneath the floor of the church, in the dark, they find an overflowing, leaking, ancient brick cesspool.
The stench that rises up is suffocating.
The dramatic irony of this moment is staggering. You have all these terrified citizens fleeing the streets, running into the church, kneeling on the floor, and praying to the heavens for salvation from the plague in the air.
And literally underneath their knees, seeping into the earth just inches below them, is a physical, festering pool of the exact biological contamination that is killing them.
It is a literal, physical, structural flaw that they are interpreting as divine atmospheric punishment. It's horrifying.
It is the perfect physical manifestation of the entire ideological conflict.
They are looking to the heavens for answers, while the killer is breeding in the dirt below their feet.
This discovery in the church gives them the leverage they finally need to force an official excavation.
They need to dig.
Yes. Holmes, Snow, and Whitehead corner the local parish authorities and force them to dig around the Broad Street pump itself.
This excavation scene reads like the climax of a horror movie. They get a local laborer named York to dig down into the street next to the pump.
The local crowd is watching, terrified, murmuring, some still muttering about Snow's death fumes.
York is digging down through the cobblestones, down into the dark earth. What exactly do they find down there?
They find exactly what Snow hypothesized, what Whitehead tracked, and what Holmes deduced.
The smoking gun.
As York digs down past the brickwork of the well, about 20 feet down, the smell becomes entirely unbearable. His shovel strikes a decaying, cracked waste pipe.
Oh my God.
It is the drainage pipe leading from the cesspool belonging to a house at 40 Broad Street. The mortar joints of the pipe are heavily corroded, and a thick, dark, gelatinous ooze of human effluent is leaking directly out of the pipe.
And it's going right into the water.
Seeping steadily into the surrounding soil, filtering right through the brickwork of the Broad Street well.
The physical proof is undeniable.
It is no longer a statistical theory. It is a cracked pipe and a visibly poisoned water supply.
A city poisoned by its own convenience, as Holmes remarks in the text.
It's a dark, gruesome triumph. They finally have the undeniable proof.
But, as we see in the next section, having the scientific proof and getting the political authorities to actually act on it
are two very, very different battles.
Two different planets. The physical proof has been unearthed from the mud, and now the setting shifts from the open, stinking streets of Soho to the quiet, suffocating bureaucracy of the Board of Health.
This is the final showdown between data and dogma.
It's a battle of data interpretation. Snow stands before the Board of Health, presided over by Sir Benjamin Hall, and faces off against William Farr. And then Snow brings out the ultimate trump card, the Baby Lewis case.
The Baby Lewis case is the tragic origin point of the entire Soho outbreak.
Walk us through that because it's so meticulous.
Okay, so using Farr's own mortality records against him, Reverend Whitehead did the painstaking legwork to trace the very first cholera death in the Soho neighborhood.
Patient 0?
Right. And he traced it to an infant, Baby Lewis, living at 40 Broad Street.
40 Broad Street, the house with the cracked pipe.
Yes. When the baby fell ill, the child's mother washed her soiled nappies and dumped the infected water into the home's cesspool. That specific cesspool at 40 Broad Street was the exact one that York the laborer found leaking into the Broad Street well.
So Snow presents the board with a complete, unbroken chain of causality. The initial infection of the infant, the specific method of waste disposal, the physical structural leak in the pipe, and the subsequent explosive geographic spread of deaths radiating outward from that single municipal pump.
It's an airtight, unassailable case.
He has everything. He looks at the board and begs them, remove the pump handle. If I am wrong, no harm is done. The people simply walk a bit further for their water. If I am right, thousands of lives will be spared.
A perfectly rational plea.
And what does this room full of the brightest, most educated men in England do?
They differ. The Board of Health looks at the cracked pipe, the map, and the baby's timeline, and they call his evidence anecdotal.
Unbelievable.
They claim it requires months of further committee investigation.
While people are dying by the hour.
Right. They completely refuse to cause public alarm by shutting down a popular water source, and more importantly, they refuse to publicly admit that their entire atmospheric paradigm, which their careers are built upon, is fundamentally flawed.
So they just shut him down.
Sir Benjamin Hall literally gavels the meeting closed, leaving Snow completely defeated by the inertia of bureaucracy.
This is the moment where Gabriel Stroup makes a massive, thrilling divergence from real history.
This is where the fiction really takes over.
Yes, because in reality, Dr. Snow did manage, after immense, exhausting pleading, to reluctantly convince the local parish board of guardians, not the National Board of Health, but the local guys, to remove the pump handle as a temporary precaution.
It was a quiet, bureaucratic victory in real life.
But in Stroup's speculative fiction, the board totally stonewalls them. The door is slammed in their faces.
So what happens in the story instead?
In the fiction, Holmes and Watson are walking back to Baker Street with Snow after the disastrous meeting. Snow is a broken man, realizing the city is going to continue drinking the poison.
He's given up.
They approach the Broad Street pump in the dead of night. Holmes stops. He looks at the heavy iron handle of the pump.
Oh, I love this part.
He realizes that waiting for bureaucratic permission, waiting for the board to overcome their cognitive dissonance, simply means more innocent people will die by morning.
So Holmes takes the law into his own hands.
He physically attacks the machine. Holmes physically wrenches the iron handle off the pump himself, rendering it completely inoperable.
He breaks the machine to stop the plague. It's such a dramatic shift.
Why make that change? Why discard the historical bureaucratic process and have Holmes commit a physical act of vandalism?
Because Stroup is crystallizing the theme of rationalism as salvation. It is the philosophical climax. When catastrophic institutional failure occurs, when the bureaucracy is too sluggish, too compromised, or too ideological to protect the populace, the rational actor is forced to assume the moral burden.
Breaking city property to forcefully stop people from poisoning themselves is a profound moral responsibility.
Holmes is stating, through action, that the preservation of life supersedes the rules of the system.
But Stroup is careful to avoid a simple, triumphant Hollywood ending, isn't he?
Yes, he grounds the aftermath in harsh realism. The mob in the story does not cheer Holmes as a savior.
When the residents of Soho wake up and realize their primary water source has been destroyed, they riot.
They throw stones at the doctors, shatter windows, and scream that the wealthy authorities are intentionally denying the poor access to water.
Because to the residents, the water from the pump was clear and cold. It tasted better than the piped water.
They cannot see the microscopic danger, so they view the destruction of the pump as an act of oppression.
It highlights the difficult truth. that scientific progress rarely arrives to immediate applause.
The victory of empirical evidence over comfortable ignorance is messy, contentious, and largely ungrateful.
Observing the riot, Holmes notes that ignorance that preserves comfort is the great curse of civilization.
The people desperately wanted to retain the comfort of their familiar water source, even if it was silently killing them, rather than face the terrifying, paradigm-shattering reality that their entire urban infrastructure was fundamentally lethal.
That is a staggering burden for anyone who pushes back against an accepted consensus.
And this act of defiant rationality, this physical breaking of the mechanism of disease, establishes the baseline for the rest of Gabriel Stroup's collection.
If we zoom out from the ghost map and look at the broader architecture of the necessary fictions of Sherlock Holmes, Ellen Mackenzie's modern framing warns us that this clean, heroic model of scientific deduction is not sustainable.
The ghost map serves as the foundational text of the 45,000-word cycle. It presents rationalism at its most heroic.
A discrete problem is identified, logic is applied, decisive action is taken, and lives are definitively saved.
Causality is direct. The pump is the killer, break the pump, stop the killing.
But Ellen Mackenzie's footnotes heavily foreshadow a darker, more complex trajectory for the detective.
In the subsequent stories, Holmes will be forced to confront phenomena that entirely resist this kind of neat Victorian resolution.
Looking at the synopsis of the other stories, we see Holmes investigating issues like the early evidence of climate change in the Scottish Highlands, or unraveling the institutional fraud of the Piltdown Man hoax.
These aren't simple locked-room murders with a clear villain you can hand over to Scotland Yard.
Precisely. Holmes is transitioning from investigating individual crimes to investigating wicked problems.
These are systemic issues characterized by distributed causality, vast geographic scale, and deep institutional complicity.
Holmes will slowly realize that his power of deduction can map a failing system perfectly, but it cannot intrinsically fix it.
The moral clarity of the detective blurs when faced with problems that are too vast to assign singular blame.
What is the psychological toll on a rational mind when it uncovers a truth that offers no immediate remedy?
It's heavy. Think about Ellen Mackenzie sitting in the Cambridge Library in 2025, surrounded by screens and data streams, looking back at these Victorian titans fighting over hand-drawn maps and iron water pumps.
In her epilogue, she reflects on how the fictional Holmes illuminates the messy reality of scientific history.
She concludes that science is not merely a sterile accumulation of cold facts. It is an intensely human narrative.
It reveals how certainty was constructed, how error persisted not despite intelligence, but because of it.
It is political, it is flawed, and ultimately it requires an individual to care enough to look under the floorboards and risk the ridicule of their peers.
It is a profound synthesis of Stephen Johnson's history and Stroup's literary imagination.
We must remember the tragic historical reality of Dr. John Snow.
Despite the map, despite the overwhelming logic of his argument, Snow died of a stroke in 1858, just 4 years after the Broad Street outbreak.
He died while the medical establishment largely continued to reject his waterborne theory, clinging stubbornly to miasma.
As Reverend Whitehead laments in the epilogue of the story, belief and truth need not arrive together. One walks ahead, the other limps after.
Stroup utilizes Sherlock Holmes, the ultimate symbol of perfect logic, to explore the agonizing, limping reality of historical progress.
The story serves as a permanent reminder that data, no matter how elegant, does not save people.
It is the human courage to act upon that data against the weight of consensus that creates change.
What an absolute marathon of an intellectual journey.
It really is.
We've gone from the microscopic, terrifying mechanism of the cholera bacteria through the deeply entrenched dogma of miasma theory, mapped the streets with John Snow's brilliant geographic deduction, and watched a fictional Sherlock Holmes shatter an iron pump to save London from its own institutional stubbornness.
It is a brilliant exploration of observation, the seductive danger of bad data, and the messy humanity required to advance science.
But before we wrap up this deep dive into the historical reality of the ghost map and Gabriel Stroup's incredible fiction, there is one final, lingering detail from the story's commemoration scene that we haven't touched on.
A brief but incredibly resonant moment.
Years after the cholera outbreak, William Farr, the statistician who was so wrong about the elevation data, is speaking with Holmes. Farr, still obsessed with numbers, tells Holmes that he dreams of one day feeding all the city's health data into Charles Babbage's mechanical calculating engine, a massive, brass, 19th century precursor to the computer.
Farr envisions a machine that can process the variables and predict disease outbreaks before a single person dies.
It is essentially a Victorian dream of artificial intelligence managing public health.
And Holmes looks at Farr's eager face and issues a chilling warning. And if they see what we cannot, what stops them from hallucination?
A warning that echoes loudly into our present day.
It really does.
So as you go about your week, living in a world completely governed by complex algorithms that map your health, your behavior, and your reality, consider that question. Are we absolutely certain we aren't constructing new digital miasmas, elegant models that confirm our biases but obscure the truth?
Who is checking the maps our machines make?
And if the algorithm points one way, but the reality on the ground points another, would you have the courage to pick up the wrench and break the pump? Something for you to mull over.